Today on Listen Up, human trafficking. The demand for paid sex is fueling it, but resistance to buying and selling people is growing. That's next. Welcome to Listen Up, where we explore news from a Christian perspective. Today we look at Canada's fight against human trafficking, the buying and selling of people. Canadians living in slavery, coerced into work against their own will. The market demand for paid sex and cheap labor is what drives human trafficking, and believe it or not, crowds at large sporting events are an open market. Folks here are excited about the Olympics coming to town. This is a lineup for the Olympic pins. But there's another whole group of people talking about a very different issue that could be coming to town around the Olympics: the buying and selling of people for the purpose of sex.
Now, most of us are painfully aware that the 2010 Olympics are right around the corner. We already have a problem here with the demand for paid sex, fueling the exploitation of women. So it already exists here. Now imagine what's going to happen when we add 300,000, 500,000 visitors to this mix.
Buying sex is not a sport is a campaign capitalizing on the Olympics. And why is human trafficking going to get worse around the Vancouver Olympics?
Anytime that you have a mega event, whether it's a large convention, a sports event, the Calgary Stampede, the Super Bowl, trafficking goes up because the demand goes up. Anytime you have men traveling away from their social networks where they enjoy a degree of safety and anonymity, they're more likely to pay for sex.
It's not the kind of publicity Olympic promoters want.
In Vancouver this time, there will be people watching because we've raised the awareness of the issue.
In full-color posters plastered in provocative ads, the Salvation Army says they've encountered too many victims to ignore the reality that the Vancouver Olympics are the right venue to battle against human trafficking.
People need to know that it does happen. It could easily be their daughter, their granddaughter, their neighbor's daughter. These girls are trafficked right on our streets, right from our streets. And so anything you can do to help them is necessary.
A bevy of academics, governments, police, and activists conclude human trafficking is the fastest growing illegal trade activity, and the economic impact is staggering. Estimated to be in excess of $32 billion, it accounts for thousands of people arriving in this country illegally every year. Human traffickers scoop vulnerable teenagers from Canadian streets who live in and out of social services and away from protective relationships. Traffickers patrol our Aboriginal reserves for victims. Later in our show, we'll hear how one Vancouver woman who never intended to be sold for sex broke free from 15 years of bondage. But first, what exactly is human trafficking, and how is it surfacing in Canada?
Slavery is alive and well in Canada right now as we speak, and it's in a very bad, insidious form.
Canada's hidden but growing infection in the human exploitation market.
Yes, I think Canadians are generally of the opinion that this is a nice country with nice people, and it's a shock to think that this kind of slavery goes on. And yet it does. No country is immune from this. This is a human problem. It's based on wealth and exploitation that is universal, and so Canada is no different.
Well, this is a really recent phenomenon in Canada, but people around the world have been working on this issue for years. Human trafficking in the criminal code means causing someone to provide a labor or service out of a fear for their safety.
Ben Perrin is Canada's leading expert on human trafficking and has devoted almost a decade of research to this issue.
So if you recruit someone to do that, that's human trafficking. If you exercise control over their movement to exploit them, that's also human trafficking.
It's the targeting of young girls. That's how they start out, and they force them into the sex trade. They use, they abuse them, and some of these girls die.
Joy's retirement as a career teacher was interrupted by a call to civic action.
I was a member of the Manitoba legislature, an MLA in Manitoba, and I was a justice critic, and my son was in the ICE unit, in the Integrated Child Exploitation Unit, and they were trying to catch pornographers who were luring children, who were pretending they were 14-year-olds, and they weren't 14-year-olds. They were men in their 40s, 50s, who were luring young girls and doing them great harm. As I started working with the victims and started working closer with my son, I found out that there were victims of human trafficking where people were actually trafficked for money, for sex, all across this country and forced against their will to do that.
Disgusted by the shocking revelation, Joy took action and led a formal study on the reality of human trafficking in Canada.
I know even when I went to Parliament, I was surprised to find out that parliamentarians didn't know anything about human trafficking. In fact, when I tried to bring it on the status of women, the first time I was elected, I was laughed at.
No one's laughing now. Parliament voted to amend the criminal code to include the trafficking of persons. And just recently, the House of Commons voted overwhelmingly to pass Bill C-268, imposing mandatory minimum criminal sentences on traffickers.
So at the core of it, the concept is that we're repulsed by people being treated as if they were property. They no longer have control of their own lives and futures. They can be exploited in sweatshops or in brothels, in strip clubs or on the internet, and they all share the same attribute. They've lost the ability to make decisions about their own future. Someone else is calling the shots and usually making a great deal of profit off of them. The profits that are being made by these traffickers reach almost $250,000 per year by a single victim being sold for sex.
Former RCMP officer Brian McConaughey has tracked this growing industry both abroad and at home.
But the demand is coming from the West, where the money is, where the guys have the freedom, be it vacation or financial freedom, to travel the world and partake in child sex, whether it be in Asia or other countries in the world, that it was actually out there. Because we all kind of know it's there, but it's sort of, it's a mystery.
Joy exposes the strategy behind traffickers preying on their victims.
They go and they look for them in other countries. They tell them, you know, you can come to Canada, you can get a good job, we'll give you a great future. And when they get to Canada, they take all their documents away. They rape them and they take them across the country, making lots of money off the backs of these innocent victims. That's one way. A second way is guys target girls, where they look for them and the girls fall in love with them. They become their boyfriends, and then their objective is to get them away from their parents, to get them away from their family networks. The third way is the kids on the street. If they're vulnerable, and they are when they're on the street, they shoot them up with drugs and force them into the sex trade. They're the easier ones to get a hold of.
We saw how we've needed freedom of information applications to find these cases, to discuss the cases, like what went on from the Richmond Wellness Center to the Cloud9 body shop in Calgary. Why don't Canadians know these trafficking cases are underway? Why is it such a quiet work of the RCMP?
Yeah, I'm not sure why there's a reserve there, because I'm of the opposite opinion. I think Canadians desperately need to know that there's an issue here, because most Canadians would be appalled if they understood what really goes on to human beings in this. This is modern slavery. This is exactly what Wilberforce in 1807 managed to get made illegal. This is the kind of international traffic and sometimes domestic traffic that is devastating for lives. So this is not about taking a girl from another country or another community and putting her into a home to do some domestic work and perhaps overworking her. This is brutality.
And it's happening in Canada.
Absolutely.
When Listen Up returns, from massage parlors to hanging out at the mall, tracking those hunting for victims to fill the demand for paid sex.